a bit about his Jain friends of India and the limits of ideals such as nonviolence. As a welcoming congregation, we extend a warm greeting to any newcomers. We invite those of you who are visiting for the first or second time, if you are brave doing so, to stand and introduce yourselves so we can have the opportunity to get to know you. Do we have any newcomers among us who would like to stand? Thank you. Yeah. Naya, Carolyn, Amy, Michael. If you are new, we invite you to stop by the greeters table to pick up an informational packet. Also, please join us after the service for a conversation and refreshments served on the patio. If you've been coming for a while but are not yet a member and feel that you have found a spiritual home with us, please talk to our minister, a member of the membership committee, or someone at the greeters table about becoming a member. It is wonderful to hear the joyous sounds of friendship and communion, and you can continue your conversation over refreshments after the service. So the third Sunday of every month, we pause to celebrate all the birthdays in our community. If you have we will have a cake. We have a cake. We shall have cake to celebrate after the service. And so now, who here has a birthday in January? Can we embarrass you by standing up? And yes, all right. Come on, there must be a few. All right, some hands. All right. So let's all sing happy birthday to these wonderful UUs. We have some exciting events coming up. One I'll read from our order of service. There are auditions today for the Readers Theater upcoming presentation of love letters in celebration of Valentine's Day. If you would like to join this and audition, there will be an opportunity to do this with auditions after the service today. So please consider that. And there are many other exciting events coming up, and please refer to the order of service for more information on these or the website. Our various groups and events reflect our vision of being a transformational home for liberal spirituality and a dynamic community leader in Orange County and beyond. And now, Nikki and Barb will light our flaming chalice, our central symbol of our Unitarian Universalist heritage. We light this chalice to celebrate the inherent worth and dignity of every person, to reaffirm the historic pledge of liberal religion to seek that justice that which transcends mere legality and moves towards the resolution of true equality, and to share that love which is ultimately beyond even our cherished reason, that love which unites us.
Everybody. So our book today is called Mahavira, the Hero of Nonviolence. And Ian mentioned him a little bit, so we're going to learn some more. In a faraway land called India, a great leader was born on this earth. He came to teach people how to live a life free of violence. His story began in a high mountain kingdom more than 2,600 years ago. One night, Queen Trishala had a dream. In her dream, she saw many fine objects. There was a lion, an elephant, a pair of fish. There was also a garland, a flag, and a smokeless fire. The next morning, the queen described the sacred dream to her husband, King Siddhartha. The king gathered his astrologers. They were to interpret the meaning of this dream. The astrologers soon agreed. The queen will give birth to a special child. He will show the spiritual path of nonviolence to the world. The king and queen were filled with happiness. As a young prince, he practiced the Jain way of life. Jains believe in nonviolence. They have deep respect and compassion for all living beings, including animals and plants. So great is their love for animals that they do not eat meat. They are vegetarians. One day, the prince was playing with his friends in the forest. He challenged them. The first one to climb the tree will be the winner. As he raced up the tree, he saw his friends run away in fear. The prince turned around. Suddenly, he saw a fearsome snake ready to bite him. Without fear, the prince picked up the snake. He had the strength to crush it with his bare hands, but the prince did not wish to kill another living being. He had respect for all forms of life, and so he chose to lead the snake away to a safe place. His friends watched in awe. News of the prince's bravery and compassion spread to the city. Soon the people began calling him Mahavira, which means very brave. One day, Mahavira was walking on the banks of a river. As he began to meditate, he heard a voice warning him. "This place is haunted. Terrible demons will not let you stay here." But Mahavira thought to himself, "I love all creatures. I fear no one and no one fears me, and so I will meditate here unharmed." As the night came, a mighty demon appeared. It raced towards Mahavira in the form of a mad elephant. With its sharp tusks, it picked him up and threw him into the air. But Mahavira's great power of peace kept him unhurt and unafraid. The mighty demon saw that Mahavira was filled with love and compassion. He said, "In my anger, I have wrongly tried to kill you. Now I see that you are a great and powerful soul. Please forgive me." Mahavira replied calmly, "Anger has led you to cruelty and revenge. It can only be defeated by forgiveness and love. Only they can end the violence. Only they can bring you peace." The story of Mahavira and the demon is a reminder of how we must all forgive. Just as in North America there is a day for giving thanks, Thanksgiving Day, so Jains have a day for asking forgiveness, Forgiveness Day. On this day, family and friends meet each other. They call each other, they write to each other, they ask forgiveness for whatever they have said or done to hurt others. Mahavira lived and traveled in northern India. During this time, there lived another great teacher, the Buddha. Although the two never met, both taught the truth about the spiritual life. The religion of the Buddha, Buddhism, spread from India to East Asia. The religion of Mahavira, Jainism, remained in India. But today, both religions have expanded throughout the world. The teachings of Mahavira were very popular. All living beings, including animals, would gather to listen to his words of peace. Each would understand Mahavira in their own language. The lion would sit down with the lamb, and the king with the beggar. Each would respect the other, for they could see a living soul and not just a body in their neighbor. At the age of 72, after giving his last sermon, Mahavira left this world. His soul reached Moksha. In Moksha, there is no pain, suffering, or sadness. It is a place of knowledge, happiness, and bliss. On this day, all living things rejoiced. They knew that Mahavira's soul had been freed from this world. Since then, the Jains celebrate the festival of Diwali on this day. They eat tasty sweets and sing religious songs, and they visit family and friends and exchange gifts. The message of Mahavira has lasted for thousands of years. To this day, it influences millions of people. Mahatma Gandhi, India's spiritual leader, learned his practice of nonviolence from a Jain teacher. His mother was greatly influenced by Jain monks. Gandhi spent many hours learning how nonviolence could be used in dealing with society's problems. He used it to fight for India's freedom from British rule. Others learned from Gandhi. In the United States, Martin Luther King Jr., who just celebrated his birthday, used nonviolence to bring equal rights for African Americans. Imagine bringing justice, equality, and peace to the world. And imagine doing so without using violence. Such is the teaching of Mahavira of Jainism. Who will be the next person to take this message of nonviolence and make our world a better place? Perhaps you. And now we're going to sing all the children, youth, and teachers off to the classrooms.
Dr. Philip Clayton.
Well, friends, it's great to be back at Tapestry. I think it's been a few years since I was here. You know that as a Quaker, I feel Unitarians is probably our closest cousins. You know, I actually know in our meeting that people wander back and forth between the UU congregation in our neighborhood and Quaker. You know, there's a little bit of talking here among you guys, sometimes a lot of talking, you know. And so I really recommend some Sunday when you just want to sit in complete silence, you know. It's a lovely balancing out in the end. We were actually married, as I mentioned last time, in the congregation, UU congregation near San Rafael in the Bay Area, actually Terra Linda, which is the place that my wife Judy grew up as a kid. So I have to say, I really enjoyed today's topic, and I probably had more fun preparing this than you'll have listening to it. Another title you might think of for what I'm talking about would be Daily Ahimsa. And what I love about the Jain way of life is the blend of theory and practice, the way those two hold together. And today I want to give you a sense of the mountains, or mountain, and the valleys of the practice of daily ahimsa. An amazing process. So for today, you all are honorary Jains. And you don't have to speak Gujarati or have grown up in India, or I won't imitate the accent, but speak differently than Americans. Because for Jains, everybody who practices this way is a Jain. It's not an ethnic religion at all. All right, taking ahimsa to its limit. To view it as the most extreme call to nonviolence ever manifested in one of the world's religions. An amazing process. It calls us to the most advanced form of nonviolence that we can even conceive. That's the mountain. And it calls us to sort of journey up the mountain as far as we can. And to recognize the places where the limits come. Do you see? Taking nonviolence to the limit. And then, well, we'll talk about what happens when you reach the limits of where you can go. I do want to say, as a liberal religious person, that I think that this ethical call it elevates our overall humanity. It makes us most deeply and beautifully human. So for me, whether you put it in a religious or non-religious context, it's transformative. The mere attempt. That's what I think we learn from the Jains. And I'm going to have to tell you some stories as we go. So here's the first story. The sky-clad monk was sitting in the small square in front of the Jain temple in the sacred city on the edge of the Ganges. My host, Dilip Shah, had brought me up to Varanasi to visit some Jain centers. And when we saw the sky-clad monk, we walked up, got down on our knees, and touched his feet, which is a sign of honoring in India. Sky-clad means naked. It's an extreme form, a deep manifestation of being a Jain monk. He carries only 3 things with him. He carries a tiny little volume of the Jain scriptures, including the teachings of Lord Mahavira. He contains a little bowl, way smaller than this, for offerings, because he has no money. If people choose not to feed him, he just dies. And he carries a little brush. Does anyone know what the brush is for? Do you remember? He brushes the path in front of him so that you guys know, so that he doesn't accidentally step on a bug and create violence, ahimsa, in the process. So my friend asked him in Gujarati, where are you going? And he mentioned a Jain sacred site about 500 miles away. It was the middle of winter in North India. Obviously, he didn't have a lot of coats on. This painful cough racked his body. He was really little more than skin and bones. And so my friend said, and what will you do after visiting this sacred site? And he said, I will walk back again. And I've long been intrigued by what would lead a person to live in this way. I think what draws me is that I think that among the world's religions, there are 2 ideals that sort of stand as the highest. The call to compassion, to live compassion, and the call to live nonviolence. And I think you can already see, without my explaining it, how those 2 are tied together. You can't have the one without the other. So when you hear the story of the monk, you see a sense of being called to ahimsa at the limits, as far as you can go. So again, climbing that mountain. And probably what's true is that as you go further up the mountain, you begin to get into the clouds, and you can't actually see the path. So I had never encountered a person before who would so give up violence that he wouldn't wear any clothing, that he would seek to make as little to no impact on the world as possible. That was in the clouds. And at that moment, the clouds parted, and I could see further up the mountain. I wonder whether he can't see all the way, whether something is still in the clouds, even for this holy monk. I'm going to talk later about getting up the mountain for us. Second story. A number of friends and fellow nuns had been sitting by her side for a number of days, and now the end was near. No one had resisted when the elderly nun made the vow of salekana, which is fasting to death. Fasting to death. And as the word got out that the end was near, more and more of the nuns in Delhi came to sit with her in that large upper room above the temple. And lay people, women, came as well. A great sense of sacredness descended upon this group. Many were in deep meditation and reflection. The only sound that could be heard was the slow, labored breathing of the nun, the senior nun in the group. And they listened as the last struggling breath sounded, and then the silence was complete. An amazing expression. Having meditated and moved further and further along this path up the mountain, she came to that spot, a long part of the Jain tradition, when in the desire to cause no more karma, no more violence to others, no more consumption on her part, she gives up eating altogether. And it's interesting because I talked to monks who would say, well, so I have a small breakfast and then I go for 48 hours and then I have a small breakfast. Do you see it's a kind of transition bit by bit until Salekana, the sort of highest last step, is manifested. Friends, how do you understand such a practice? Does it amaze you? I mean, it both brings tears to my eyes, and I don't understand it in some ways. There's a word in the Western tradition to describe this, a long traditional word. It's called supererogation. Supererogation. It comes from Latin supererogatio, which means to pay more than is asked for. To pay more. And whatever ahimsa is in its highest level is a form of supererogation. Now, in the Western tradition, it involves the perfect emulation of what God would require of one, beyond the law. And it comes from Jesus' most famous teaching, the Sermon on the Mount. Ian read that text recently. So you've heard what the law says. Don't commit murder. And I say that if you're even angry with your brother or sister, that's like murder. You've heard an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, that's revenge. But I say to you, when somebody slaps your one cheek, turn the other so they can slap that one as well. You've heard, love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but Jesus says, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Do you hear it? Do you hear the similarity to ahimsa? It goes beyond the Jewish law. In fact, it goes beyond any law. And just in case you weren't sure that Jesus was pointing in that direction, he says later in the same chapter, therefore be perfect, even as your heavenly Father is perfect. In other words, you can never achieve it. It's so high and so beyond any standard. You can strive in that direction, but you can never say it. Whereas I remember a Christian professor once who said, I said, I just feel so, filled with sin. I was a conservative Christian. And he said, I go whole days without any sin at all. I thought, is that because he's a New Testament professor? Or, what is it? This is not a notion. This is a notion that it explodes sin out of its complete framework that the very concept falls back. Supererogation, beyond anything that you could imagine. Rising above law or duty altogether, transcending obligation, transcending normative language, transcending any reasonable expectation, nonviolence to the point that even taking food doesn't seem right. Story number 3. It was the beginning of this work with the multiple religions that I was engaged in. Last time I was here, I talked about it. And we were inviting the Jain leaders over to our house for the first time. Now, my wife prides herself in running a clean kitchen, me less so, and we're vegetarians, so it felt like we were ready, right? So our senior guest, Dr. Sulek Jain, asked us first, we'd like actually to do Jain vegan. And so Judy said, what is that? And he said, first it's vegan, so there's no dairy products. Okay, we've heard of that. But that's only the start. We don't eat any root vegetables, so no onions, no carrots, no, what am I leaving out? Potatoes. Potatoes would be in there. And I said, why? And they said, because you kill the plant when you harvest it. If you take an apple off a tree, the tree still grows. But this kills a plant, so we don't do it. Wow, we thought. And then they said, could we please eat indoors and actually before sunset? And he said, so that we're sure there are no flies in the lettuce or other bugs. And Judy said, I don't serve salads with flies in them. But what if, what if it happened? And then it's just clear that the Jain practice was trying to guide them so that the eating didn't bring about ahimsa. This is the highest form of supererogation that I know in any tradition. And interestingly, it's not a theistic religion. It's not because God calls for it or there's some notion of sin. It's from an understanding that all of our actions bring about karma. The perspective is amazing. It's like ecology. It's the perspective that all are interconnected and every other one is like us. Not only among humans, not only between humans and animals, but absolutely every living thing is or has jiva. Jiva means a soul, a life principle. And for us to squash the life principle in any others is to engage in a kind of ahimsa or violence. Now, here's the part that really interests me. With this really high ideal, ahimsa taken to the limit, the Jains are actually among the most accepting and kind and gentle people you'll ever meet. Story number 4. I asked them, so what do you do when you encounter a meat eater? Because for a Jain, I mean, that's a kind of murder. To eat, they once said, anything with eyes or anything that gives birth is so similar to us, how could you imagine eating it? So I said, how do you deal with Americans, who might eat meat 7 times a week, or with sandwiches 14 times a week, or with sausages 21 times a week, And they said, well, here's what we do. We say to the person, do you think you could think about not eating meat 1 day a week? And the person might say, yeah, I could do that. And then they meet their Jain friend the next week at the supermarket, and the Jain said, how's it going? Well, I did without meat on Tuesday, or Friday, I guess it would be for Catholics. And then the Jain says, well, this is wonderful. Can you think about not eating meat on 2 days of the week? Well, I think I could do that. Do you see? Wherever you are on the mountain, in fact, way down in the valley, which is where most Americans live, right? For every human being to survive on this planet, we have to have 1 carbon footprint, as you know. What's the average of Americans? 35. Highest in the world per person. Right? And the Jain says, can you move 1 further step? And then you're a vegetarian, as we've settled into, and then they say, well, why not vegan? Wherever you stand on the mountain, the invitation is to move up 1 step. And they lead you gently in that direction. The essence of all knowledge, Ian read, consists in not committing violence. Wow. Ahimsa is nothing but the observance of equality. Nonviolence is the observance of equality. Ladies and gentlemen, this actually transforms everything in your approach to life, because knowledge even is derived from the pursuit of nonviolence. It means that it makes you more and more aware of the violence that occurs around us. Let me conclude with a few instances of daily ahimsa, which I've learned from my Jain friends and feel called to. At home, middle-class families have a huge amount of karmic influence. What if one makes it a process at home to begin living in a more nonviolent way? Our kids have learned to say, in our family, we do it this way. Kind of like your story about your 7-year-old. In other words, a practice at home is transformative to the kids. Second, at the store. Our supermarkets are one of the most violent places in our daily lives. Not only are there many animals killed and left there in the store, but the transportation of things around the world causes huge amounts of karma or of influence on the environment. Number 3, eating. And I think I've said enough about that, but the decisions you make about eating are massive. Next story. We were at a Buddhist retreat center in Massachusetts some years ago. And when we walked into the dining room, it said it was called the chapel. And they observed complete silence. And they served a vegetarian meal, or you served yourself a vegetarian meal. And then you would sit in complete silence and meditate on the food that you were eating and your gratitude for each of the grains and so forth that you were offered. It was a sacred moment, eating. Number 4, playful simplicity. What it offers to children and a family to compost. Do you ever think that that could be the most fun thing that your family does? It does if you have little kids, right? It does if you're older. Playful simplicity. Number 5, business. I'll have to skip over. Number 6, religious community. That's what we do when we come together. If you're a Jain, if you guys are honorary Jains, you encourage each one to move a little bit up the mountain. You know, you can have an Ahimsa group, a nonviolence group, and, you know, I say, oh gosh, I have this tendency to yell at my kids. And you say, that's all right. That's where you're on the mountain. Do you think you could have a yelling-free day once a week? See where it goes? How about 2? And pretty soon you're aware. And finally, the sense of self. The beginning of true transformation is within. There's hardly a religious tradition that doesn't teach that. If the heart and mind are inclined to violent attitudes and actions, we will act. If the heart begins with the practice of peace, of personal transformation, we will act differently. We'll become wise souls as we seek this output. In closing, Jainism's 3 jewels are right perception, right knowledge, and right action. Look at the connection. Right perception, perceiving the suffering of others. Right knowledge, which is the awareness of jiva in all, and that leads to right action. Ladies and gentlemen, we are actors among actors, surrounded by other jivas who, like us, perceive, are sentient, and are involved in that path toward moksha. Our daily goal is to minimize that damage. Daily ahimsa has effects not only on other beings, but on ourselves. So in short, I think the 2 highest ideals of the world's religions or wisdom traditions are the pursuit of compassion, like Buddhist compassion meditation, and the pursuit of ahimsa as a highest ideal and as a reality to do the next step and the next step and the next step toward nonviolence. Thank you.
We extinguish this flame, knowing the light remains in the warmth and compassion of our hearts until we are together again. Thank you. Samuel Trumburi gives us our benediction. Every week we gather in this beautiful space to find peace. Each week, words and music offer and celebrate peace, with the hope of instilling it in us. Now take the peace that you have found here back out into the world with you. Renewed in our faith and inspired to act, let us be the peacemakers the world aches for. And by being peacemakers, let us find the peace we long for. Go in peace, make peace, be at peace. Shalom, salam, namaste, and blessed be.